I just feel like I learned that regardless of our age, we all need each other. And I was still struggling with, I knew I could support homeschooling through the organizations we started and that type of thing. I just was not as keenly tuned into how much individual moms really appreciate the respect from older moms and vice versa.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoy the program.
Well, welcome to Homeschool Talks. I'm Jim Mason, Vice President at Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and my guest who came back remarkably for a second podcast interview with me is my old friend Zan Tyler. If you have not already listened to the first episode of our podcast with Zan, you're going to want to do that for sure, because she gave us kind of a blow-by-blow, remarkable history of how homeschooling came to be both an important part of her life and how it came to be a legal option for folks in South Carolina. One of the early days of the fight for homeschool freedom by one of the early homeschool leaders who has continued on and is today one of the more prominent homeschool leaders that I know, and I really appreciated her talk there. But we're going to pivot today. We're going to pivot, and I want to talk to Zan about an article that she wrote for us, the HSLDA, the Homeschool Court Report, in the second quarter of 2021, and it's called "When Homeschool Generations Link Arms." And I just Googled this on my phone, and it's available in print form, or you can read it online. Just Google "When Homeschool Generations Link Arms." And so, Zan, I understand you went on a cruise.
I did go on a cruise.
That's something you swore you would never do.
That's right. And there were three things I said I would never do: homeschool, have kids, or go on a cruise, because I'm claustrophobic, I get seasick, and I have food allergies. So that, that pretty much rules out a cruise for me. If you can't eat on a cruise, why go?
Yeah.
But we went. It was a friend of ours. It's a funny story. She had been homeschooling for over 30 years, and she realized she had been to a homeschool graduation the year before, and there was another woman who had homeschooled as long as she was, and she felt like her husband should rise up and call her blessed and do, give a tribute, and that everybody should give her a standing ovation. And she said that didn't happen. So I decided I was going to have to take my own my homeschool retirement party into my own hands. And she asked about 30 of us from Columbia to go on like a 4 or 5 day cruise. So it was really a lot of fun. Just old friends who had homeschooled together. And that the fun part of that and the fellowship kind of mitigated or overrode all the other objections I had. But the crazy thing was, we sat next to one night at dinner, we were all together, and we sat next to this table of all these young girls. We thought they were probably there for a wedding or something. And so it turns out they were homeschool moms. And we from North Carolina. And so we went, and I was talking at one end of the table, another mom was talking at the other end of the table. And one of the girls started crying. And I said, "Oh my goodness, if I said something to offend you, I am so sorry." And she said, "Oh no, we were just all sitting here talking about wondering whether we could make it another year." And then we're with you guys who we had over 400 years of combined collective experience under our belts. And they just said, we just needed that encouragement. And it's not like we all had, we didn't do a good job every day all the time. We had our own struggles, but we all loved homeschooling, and we have kids who are doing well. And it was a great encouragement. So we got together a couple of times on the cruise, and there are 1 or 2 girls that I still keep in touch with. And it really underlined the notion for me that we need each other. across this span of generations, women and homeschool moms need each other. We need to support each other. We don't need to criticize each other. We need to have an understanding that the way we homeschooled in the 80s and the 90s may look different than the way people homeschool today, but the mom's heart, I think, is the thing that never changes. Moms, by and large, want to give their kids an education that blesses them, and they want them to love the Lord, and they want them to have an education that fits their gifts and their passions and their desires for what they want to do when they leave the home. And so I'll never forget, Joe and I spoke at a conference in Japan, and we're speaking through translators. And I was realizing that these women in Japan had the same struggles I had. It's so hard to homeschool sometimes, but the same joys and the same desires and goals for their children. So there's something about being a homeschool mom that transcends age and cultures and generations and everything else.
So the cruise led you to be thinking about generations linking arms. What? Tell us more about the article that you wrote.
Well, I ended up interviewing 14 different homeschool moms, and there were let's see, I've got the article right here in front of me too, but I think there were 6 or 8 older moms that were pioneers from the same generation I was from. And we also interviewed Elizabeth Smith, who is Mike Smith's wife, president of HSLDA, and Vicki Ferris, who is Mike Ferris's wife, who is also founder of HSLDA. And so I just had a great time interviewing these women. And my goal was, what can you say? And what you did, how does it impact and benefit the lives of younger women? So I also interviewed 4 millennial moms, and we interviewed 2 African-American moms, because that was pioneering in their culture. Even though it was not in the 80s, it came later. It was still a hard-won fought battle and fight. And then I had a very close friend who was a single mom. Her husband had left her with 4 little boys, and she's homeschooled and been the breadwinner all the way through. And then another good friend of mine was blind since birth, and she homeschooled both of her boys, and also was a major breadwinner in her family. So I wanted to bring a core group of women together that had not, this wasn't pie in the sky homeschooling. Everybody had a tough road to hoe, but everybody had the same heart and the same desires for their children. A lot of times people will make comments to me like, well, homeschoolers today don't have the same vision we had. And I'm saying, oh, well, that's good, because my vision when I started homeschooling was to get my kid ready for first grade in the public school. And, that was my great vision. And it was years of homeschooling where I began to see this deeper side, or this deeper life in homeschooling, and all the benefits. And but it certainly wasn't something that was embedded in my soul to begin with.
So I'm in that, I'm a member of that famous homeschool club. My wife, I think I said in the last podcast, told me before we got married that when we had kids, we were going to homeschool them.
That's amazing. I love Debbie, by the way.
Yeah. Well, she had a vision, and she was committed to the vision all along. And I didn't get dragged kicking and screaming exactly, but I was a member of that club with kind of like what you said Joe was. It's kindergarten. What can you do? I mean, we'll give it a go, and I was in that 1 year at a time club, kind of through the first year. And one of the things, I mean, Debbie, you like her, I know, but she is kind of devious in many ways. And so what she did was, when our oldest child was 4, mind you, not even kindergarten, she said, there's this seminar. We lived in Corvallis, Oregon at the time. I was a parole and probation officer. And she said, you need to take, next Thursday and Friday off, or, some she made me schedule time off to do this. There's a seminar in Portland, and it's called The Writing Road to Reading. And it's how you teach it. We're going to go learn how you teach a kid to read. And so I went to this seminar called The Writing Road to Reading that was designed for basically homeschool parents. And I loved it. I just loved it. And I mean, just the whole process of it. We had to learn our phonograms, and I had to go.
Right.
I never learned any of that stuff.
That's right.
And so, I mean, I became persuaded pretty soon after that. And then that's when we started getting the Teaching Home magazine, if you remember that.
I do.
And I started reading about these things that were going on all over the country. This outfit from Paonian Springs called Homeschool Legal Defense Association. There were little inserts in the Teaching Home magazine. And that really started a fire in me to want to join the fight for freedom for homeschooling shortly thereafter. So that notion that we all had this, my wife did have, she did have a fully formed vision for what homeschooling would be in our life. I did not. And there are many, 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 many people in the leadership of homeschooling today who had the same idea that, well, we'll try this, but we're just gonna, if it doesn't work, we're out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Jim, I don't know if I said it enough in the last podcast, but I owe such a debt of gratitude to HSLDA, to Mike Ferris. He spent so many hours with us fighting for freedom in South Carolina, and Dee Black and Chris and Mike Smith. I just, I know what it was to begin a fight on my own. And then I watched as HSLDA came in and spent countless hours with lawsuits and working with me on SCAs and getting us established. And it makes all the difference in the world. And so today we're talking about an article of Supporting Generations. I can't sit here and in good conscience not thank HSLDA for supporting me, supporting homeschoolers around the world, really, in all of these battles, because there just gets to a point where you just can't be the Lone Ranger in these types of fights. And then, Jim, you came along, and besides everything else, I just love reading your articles. You are such a great writer. I think I read all of your articles while I was writing mine. So
I owe it all to The Writing Road to Reading. I learned my phonograms finally. Well, thank you for that. So you what did you learn that millennial moms need, want, ask for from older, more experienced homeschool moms?
One of the moms I talked with, Jen, she just said, I just want to link arms with women who are older than I am. And that's where the title of the article came from. I ended up with 200 pages of interviews after interviewing all these moms. And so I really felt like I got to know their hearts. And, the thing that surprised me, one thing that Ann Miller, who is the president of HEAV, the Virginia Homeschooling Association, said was that we need to lavish praise on young homeschool moms and just point out to them the things we think they're doing right and well. And I was surprised at how much these young moms or younger moms really appreciate the affirmation from us. And so rather than older women trying to set the parameters, or you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, I feel like we need to affirm their hearts and their goals for their children and tell them what they're doing right. And so many of these gals are light years ahead of where I was homeschooling those early years when I was just trying to tread water and survive the next day. And, I just feel like I learned that regardless of our age, we all need each other. And I was still struggling with, I knew I could support homeschooling through the organizations we started and that type of thing. I just was not as keenly tuned into how much individual moms really appreciate the respect from older moms and vice versa. It was a real learning experience for me. One of the girls who was interviewed said she was just having trouble teaching her kids to read, and she was ready to quit homeschooling when a mentor mom came in and just gave her a few tweaks, and she was on her way. So I think we need to help each other. We need to support each other, not question each other's motives and take each other apart.
You used a word that's one of my favorite words from a Bible passage. It's in 1 John chapter 3. How great is the love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God.
Amen. Amen.
Just the word picture of that lavishing. I mean, it's like, the honeycomb dripping and overflowing. And so the millennial moms are probably not that different from you or I.
That's right.
Wanting that kind of love, really, that we who have been through something can give them. And how this is something I feel I have to kind of revisit in my own life a lot. And it is when after Debbie and I got married and we were about to have our first child, a sort of mentor to me said, come on in, the water's fine. You're going to love having kids. But one thing I've learned over, raising my kids is if I could go back and do it over, there would be less correction and more praise.
Yes. Amen.
So I made it through my life with that as kind of my motto. And if I could go back and do it again, I would still say.
Yes. I agree with that, because I think I was so worried that I was ruining my kids. And I think sort of in every homeschool mom's heart, we want to bless our kids lavishly, like you said, profusely, amazingly, abundantly. And we've always got this voice saying to us, but yes, are you really ruining them? And that's the other thing I learned through this article is we all have those moments of doubt, not that homeschooling works, but that we can be an effective homeschooler. Jim, I love one of the quotes. I could have quoted you 3 or 4 times in this article, but I love this quote from you. A free people have built a radical counterculture motivated by nothing less than the love of their own children. And I love that. It just describes homeschooling. It's so true. And if I could go back and do anything different, it would be I would worry less and just enjoy my children a lot more and really enjoy that relationship and not worry about the outcome so much.
Wow. What did the seasoned veterans have to say about both reflecting back and how would they want to step in and help the newer homeschool moms?
Well, we all had a learning curve. I love Dorothy Carmen's story from Oregon. She said that when she first started homeschooling, her kids, she had their lunch bags ready. She would give them their lunch bags. They would go out the back door, come around to the front door, ring the doorbell. Dorothy would open the door and they would say, "Good morning, Mrs. Carmen." So we all had that experience of, it is homeschooling. It obviously involves schooling and education, but we don't have to do everything the way that a schoolroom does. And so we can de-school in some fun ways and have, and so a lot of us learned those lessons the hard way. And there were very few resources available to us. And so I think we probably had a bigger learning curve than millennials do today because homeschooling is so much more of a known entity. And so I think, but I still think the biggest piece of advice that I learned over and over again is that we need to love and affirm each other, just like you were talking about doing with our kids. And
well, from your interviews, do you have any outlook? So let's just put it in context. You did these interviews, and then COVID happened, I mean, I don't think COVID was a thing yet, right? When you were doing these interviews?
No, it was not. It was not.
And so the insights that you learned from interviewing these moms, both the experienced moms and the newer moms, how did that, what did you learn that can be helpful looking forward now that, things have changed so much where almost everybody knows about homeschooling as a real option for them? Homeschooling sort of grew organically and sort of in a measured way for a long time, but all of a sudden, it's just changed everywhere. Any kind of wisdom or anything here from your talks that
as I'm looking through this, I just remember Vicki, and with 200 pages of interviews, there's a lot of things that didn't make the article. But Vicki, I began quoting her, and she said, we just need to have the confidence to know that we taught our kids. I mean, we didn't teach them to walk. We helped them learn how to walk and talk, and we can teach them to read. We know them the best. We love them the best. Faye Burgess, who was my friend who was blind, said, listen, there were a lot of things I couldn't do, but nobody loved my kids the way I loved them. It was Elizabeth Smith reminded us, focus on the relationships, and read to your kids. She was a big, read out loud to your kids. Then there was Ann Miller, who just has 8 children and has done a phenomenal job of homeschooling. And she told me when I was interviewing her, she said, I was just too tired to read out loud to my kids. And that's where my husband took over. And so it was just interesting to see everybody, even in the pioneer generation, had different ways to homeschool, brought different strengths to the equation. Anne was the one that pointed out we just really need to support these young homeschool moms. I talked to Lana Thornton. Lana and Claiborne started the Tennessee group, and they still lead a big speech and debate organization. And she has speech and debate classes in her home. She said, we just need to pick up those pieces for younger moms so they don't have to do all those things while they're trying to homeschool. So I saw a huge desire among women my age to continue to work in state organizations or teach classes or tutor or take meals or just do whatever we can to support young moms. We never had those things. And then young moms have almost too much information and too many choices. And they could send their kids to a different co-op every day. How do they choose the right co-op? And how much is too much time out of the home? And so we've just got to, everybody has different issues to navigate. Every generation has different issues to navigate. I think the main thing I learned is if we can keep our focus on the right things, on our relationships with our kids, we want them to have a good education. I mean, if homeschooling didn't work educationally, we would just all pack up and go home tomorrow, But it works so well educationally. It's just learning. How to make the most of our opportunities to teach one-on-one, tailor a curriculum, teach according to learning styles, have a home that's devoted to service and leadership, all those, fun things, take field trips, go outside, all those things that you can't do when your kids are in a traditional setting. I think we all want our kids to turn out well. And I have worked with Christian publishers for a long time, and I really love, right now I'm working with BJU Press, a homeschool. And I mean, I love these curriculum companies that have a heart for teaching traditional and biblical worldview perspectives. But as a homeschooling mom, those are our tools. And any curriculum company I've worked with would say, the curriculum is the tool and not the rule. And so we can just have confidence that the one-on-one teaching, the hands-on learning, the field trips, going outside, the extracurricular kids that are the extracurricular opportunities that are really fitted to our kids' gifts, all of those things, I think, is what just makes education such a phenomenal choice. And we see it in college counselors, career counselors, and admission counselors who are actively recruiting all these homeschool kids because they're not burned out intellectually. And they say they come in owning their own education. I've talked to so many college admissions personnel people, and they just, they say the thing that's so counterintuitive to them is that homeschoolers come in with leadership skills and independence in their education. I guess they thought they would be totally unsocialized, much less not leadership candidates, and that they would be tied to their mom's apron strings. But instead, they find these confident, independent learners who had to take ownership of their education in many ways. They know how to use a syllabus. They don't expect anybody to hold their hands, and they take leadership in their careers and on the campus. So there's a lot of things about homeschooling that you can appreciate in the early years, but you realize you're really equipping your children to take their place in the world in a very unique and powerful way, I believe.
So to wrap this up, let's just pretend like one of our regular podcast homeschool moms just listened to this, and she says, boy, there's a friend of mine in the neighborhood that really needs to hear this. What would you say to that friend who isn't homeschooling yet, but in today's world, so many more are thinking about it? What would you say to that mom down the street who knows a homeschool family and is kind of thinking about it, but not sold yet?
I would say, first of all, the process of deciding is a lot harder than homeschooling. Making that leap is harder than the actual doing of the homeschooling. But the powerful things about homeschooling is your kids are getting a powerful world-class education. Our test scores are validating that kids are learning well in their homes. The career opportunities and college opportunities they have for those who want them, those kids are doing well. But it's a place where you can develop relationships with your children that will last and develop strong family bonds, which is so important in today's world. And you can give your children, you can find their gifts and their strengths and their passions. It's a great way to teach kids. And I would say, homeschool mom, you can do it. I would find the curriculum that works well for you. I've got some suggestions along those regards. Join HSLDA. Don't do it alone. Join your state organization, find a mentor mom. You don't have to be alone like we were in the 80s. Find the support that keeps you buoyed up. And that's what I would say.
So take the leap. Lots of people have, and lots more are today. And just as a closing thought, the fact that more and more people are considering and choosing homeschooling, I think could be transformational for our country in so many ways that we can't even imagine today.
Absolutely, Jim. I just think that Joe and I heard this. We were speaking at Williamsburg at a conference, and Joe went to buy our tickets, and he said, why is there a big crowd here? If you've ever been to Williamsburg, you've seen the crowds in the visitor center. And she said, well, since public schools have quit teaching the principles of American government, our membership and our attendance is down like 30 or 40%. And I agree with you that we are raising kids who understand the principles of the founding spirit of America and those principles of freedom. And that's powerful because we've got to overcome some of the things that are being taught in the culture today. And, we're raising kids who aren't afraid to stand for their convictions, their faith-based convictions. I really believe it's a revival movement. I believe it's a revival of education in a powerful way, of the family, and a spiritual revival movement. And it's bigger than every individual family. It's a big movement that can have a big impact.
And it happens one mom, one dad at a time, one family at a time, one local group at a time.
That's right.
That's the other remarkable thing about the homeschool movement. No one told us we had to do it.
That's exactly right. It is a groundswell from the grassroots up. And it is a freedom movement. It is a love your kids freedom movement.
Well, Zan, once again, thank you so much for joining us for not one, but two podcasts. My guest, once again, Zan Tyler, an early adopter of homeschooling way back in the 80s, and amazing story of her life in homeschooling and a great perspective for the movement to come yet. And with that, thank you, Zan.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you for everything you've done. We really appreciate you and everyone at HSLDA. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I am Jim Mason, and Vice President of Homeschool Legal Defense. And this has been another episode of Homeschool Talks. Join us next time. We really like getting good, positive homeschool stories out there. So thanks a lot.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's legal support team. We know homeschooling isn't always easy. That's why we're committed to giving you peace of mind so you can focus on giving your kids the best possible education. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized legal advice from our team of attorneys to help you comply with your state's homeschool law. And we'll represent you if your right to homeschool is ever challenged, even in court. Every day, we help our members respond to overreaching officials, and we stand ready to defend your homeschool against unlawful attacks. To learn more about how you can enjoy a worry-free homeschool experience, visit hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you enjoyed this conversation, leave a review to let us know what you think. To hear more conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to this podcast or head on over to hslda.org/podcast for more inspiring stories and awesome ideas about homeschooling. That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the program, and we'll see you next time.